What is up, Call of Duty fans? Welcome back. I've got the power rankings ready to go for you guys just after Fort Worth as we get ready for the first weeks of the interdivisional regular season play. And I want to just let you guys know how exactly I did this week's power rankings. In the past, it's been mostly based off results, power of schedule, stats, things like that nature. Of course, a little bit of opinion based on rosters as well. But this week is a lot more statistically based. So what I did for this one is I kind of just looked at Fort Worth, had the total map totals as well as, of course, the set scores, and ranked the teams from 1 to 16 based on things like map differential and things of that nature, and obviously placings and things like that. But I took that and averaged it with the total set and map scores. So for instance, if Luminosity, for instance, was number 4 in the overall, including not only Fort Worth but all of their map totals, I would average that 4th place with obviously their 1st place to kind of get an average as far as what their overall placement should be. So this was a way to kind of weight in not only their overall map wins and losses and set records, but also the more recency bias of course, including Fort Worth, as all 16 teams were there playing without consideration for division. So that seemed like the most fair way of going about it. So this is a very statistical breakdown essentially of the power rankings. Of course, there were a couple of things that I did kind of move around based on things like strength of schedule or things like pool results against, harder pools or easier pools or whatever it has you. But for the most part, these are straight statistical breakdowns. So let's start at the very bottom at number 16. I've got Midnight down here, and the fact of the matter is the new roster does not seem to be meriting much success, at least as of yet. They went 0-4 and 2-12 overall in maps as far as Fort Worth was concerned, and that isn't exactly great, but worse even still was the simple fact that they looked lost without any kind of synergy when it came to objective-based game modes. That became obviously most evident in modes like Search and Destroy and Control, where Midnight went a combined 1-8 between those two modes, and to be frank, they only averaged a 0.5 score against a 3 score in Control. That desperately needs to change, and honestly, I mean, let's be honest, we don't really see this roster doing a whole lot. It feels more like a pickup game roster. It just kind of comes down to, can they find any success before London and the next open roster period, because you anticipate you're going to see some more changes. It just comes down to, will this Midnight team ever fully be functioning, or will it just continue to put in people left and right until we get past this game title? In the 15th spot, I have Evil Geniuses here, and the woes of Evil Geniuses just seem to continue, even with the addition of Attach. To be fair, though, they looked marginally better. They did hold the same map count and differential as Midnight, but they did it in a more respectable way, as they were able to take on both Enigma 6 and Red Reserve to a round 5 in Control, for instance, but they were able to allow a handful of different teams to come back on them with stark advantages for Evil Geniuses, both in the Search and Destroy routinely, as well as in the hardpoint. And things like that show that this team isn't really quite ready to compete with the other players and teams in the CWL yet. I have faith with Attach this team will be better, but I can't see any stretch of the imagination where this team becomes a competitor or a mid-level team with the current roster that they have. They have a lot of work to do if they want to try to find success with this roster, and frankly, I just don't think that they're good enough, although they are better than the current Midnight situation, but marginally so, very marginally so. In the 14th spot, I have Accelerate here, and I'll admit that I didn't really care for the look of this roster compared to Midnight's while the roster change was going on, but they showed myself as well as a lot of the community that there is in fact some promise here. The 3-0 win versus Midnight is kind of whatever, but they were able to go 3-4 in Hardpoint, 3-3 in Search and Destroy, and 2-2 in Control. Not bad, especially considering that some of that was versus the likes of Luminosity and Splice in their pools, and then when they went to the losers bracket round 1, they were able to go 5 games with a surging Heretics team before they fell. Give this roster some time and they could be decent, I think. But at the same point, I don't see them being anything more than decent. They have a lot of work to do again to be a competitor, and flat out, I just don't think this roster has the same kind of a potential as teams that are above them. In the 13th spot, again, Denial, able to raise some eyebrows in the pools as they were able to beat both UYU and Heretics while also taking Splice all the way to a game 5. And they would find themselves in that matchup versus Splice in the winner's bracket. Yes, I said winner's bracket. They finished top 2 in their pool, and that had to feel good for the French team, but it's still apparent that this team needs a lot of work. They were only a mere 2-10 in Control. They only average a 0.92 rounds per Control map. Not good. In fact, it's the worst in the league. So that needs to desperately change, and honestly, they need to change that quick if they want to have a shot at being a competitor in the future. But like I mentioned, that's not a good total at all for Denial. I guess it's technically not as bad as Evil Geniuses because they have one extra control win does Denial, but their averages are worse than Evil Geniuses. So, you know, argue one way or the other. They have a better win-loss, but a worse average. It's arguable that this is still the worst team in control in the CWL. And that, again, like I mentioned, you need to be able to win controls if you want to win sets. In the 12th spot, a pretty hard hit here for UYU. I had them up in the top 8 before, and the fact was I liked this roster after the open change period for as far as Rostermania went. But the thing is, I still like them. However, they're lacking that up in front SMG presence that I kind of anticipated with only having Proto and Knight there. They're not quite able to match up against other teams in that kind of caliber around them. Methods, Mayhem, and Parzelian, though, are arguably, I would say, in the conversation for a potential top 3 AR/flex line in the CWL. I would put them up there with the likes of players like 100 Thieves and stuff like that. They've been playing absolutely out of this world, and you cannot shy away from this team. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter how good you are in your AR and flex line when you can't win trades up front or break hills and hardpoints. And that's exactly where they were the weakest over their course of Fort Worth. They went 3-5 in hardpoint with a minus 36 point differential during their time in the tournament. But at the same point, their S&D looked much better. Being able to go a total of 4-3, they were 2-7 before in Search and Destroy, so adding that 4-3 is very, very good as far as the improvement. But at the same point, they were also really good at control throughout the tournament. They went 4-1 in their games in control, only losing to Gen G. So that's, again, very, very good. If you fix the hard point, I still like this team a lot, and I have them as kind of being that potential to make the biggest jump in the standings before London if they can kind of figure out a way to work their SMG line up to the level they need to be. And the 11th spot, okay, I know what you're going to say, but Shift, they were in the hardest pool, and they got shitty luck at the draw, pulling 100 Thieves, the losers round 1. And yes, United did have all those things, and I will respond to you and say, yes, I agree with you, and that's true. However, you need to be able to win respawns against these caliber of teams if you want to be a major contender. And they were the only team in the pool to basically not do that. And that, again, is something that desperately needs to change, as they went a total of 2-8 in hardpoint plus control and did it to the tune of a minus 30 point differential in hardpoint and only averaging a 1.25 to 2.25 average in control. That is now putting them as the 3rd worst control team in the game. That's not good at all. It was, however, announced, it is important to note, that Simp will actually now be in the starting roster in place of JCap. The biggest question mark for me is, will this change merit the improvement that they desperately need in order to grow? I think that it can be. I mean, I think synergy was more of an issue than Clayster was kind of putting on with the hot mic interview that he had. But the fact of the matter is, you have to start winning control, and you have to be doing better in hardpoint if you're going to be a major contender, and United has just not been doing so well in either of those departments. In the 10th spot, again, mostly due to the head-to-head that these teams had against each other, I have Envy sitting in the 10th spot. Again, they nearly started off Fort Worth a perfect 3-0, but they were, as they were able to beat United 3-0 and Optic Gaming 3-1 before they once again blew another map 5 against Reciprocity. And again, the map 5 stat was thrown around a lot on the desk, but I still feel like it's one merit repeating. Envy is 0-4 in map 5 since the CWL start, but it's not just map 5s, as they're also only 3-5 in round 11 S&Ds. That's 8 of the 16 Search and Destroys they've played have gone to round 11. This team needs to learn how to close games, and they need to learn how to close them quickly, because as we saw at Fort Worth, this CWL pool is the tightest competition we've seen in Call of Duty yet, and if you can't close games against any opponent, you're going to find yourself with your back against the wall more often than it should. I still have concerns up front in the SMG line. Obviously, Apathy has been one of those big targets. He has played a little bit more consistently, kind of putting some weight on the Maddox line for not doing well, but regardless, Envy is just all over the board right now, and they need to find some sort of consistency, as they're struggling just a touch to beat teams in those game 5 situations. They can't seem to close out sets. And then the 9th spot, finishing out our bottom 8, I have Heretics, and yeah, maybe I rated them just a little bit too highly. Go ahead, lay it on. I understand. I had them weighted way too high up. And I won't lie, I had my head in my hands after their 0-3 start in the pools, especially after they looked promising, narrowly being able to take the first set versus Gen G. Al menos los españoles pudieron tener un segundo día decente. However, that really staggering loss versus 100 Thieves at the tune of a 0-3 has kept me from keeping them in the top 8 for the moment. I'm still hopeful in this team, as they were able to fix their search and destroy, as that was one of their biggest staggering kind of defeats in their second week of Division B, but it came at the cost of their control, as they lost 4 out of the 6 that they played, with 3 different 0-3 scorelines and a 1-3 in the mix. Those are pretty dominating losses in the control. And yes, I am focusing a lot on the control. Pero para los heretics, you need to get better at control. You need to be consistent somewhere if you want to be a competitor and find yourself in the top 8. In the top 8, we'll switch on over to that. Enigma 6 I have in the 8th spot, as they were a pretty pleasant surprise for most of us, as E6 nearly went 3-0 in pools, just falling short of 100 Thieves in what was a very back and forth set. The only thing that was really close was the control. The 3-0 versus Reciprocity, I would say, was impressive as well, but then after that, it was pretty much all downhill, as Enigma 6 couldn't win another hard point and suffered hard in the search and destroy, including 2 1-6 losses. The biggest thing for this team is they need to find a balance in their map pool. Yes, you're just changing out Cade for Chino. We saw some improvement there, but the fact of the matter was that they were all over the place, really only trying to play 2 maps the entire time in Hardpoint, and it either went well for them or it didn't go well at all. So you need to find some diversity. You need to get yourself a little bit more balanced in the map pool if you want to have a chance against these teams that are doing the research and will ban you away from your comfort zone. In the 7th spot, yes, Greenwall fans, I know you're probably not going to like this, but let's face the facts. It was not a great tournament for the SMG line of Optic, as they really found themselves not doing well and obviously going to the tune of a 1-2 in pools. But the good news was Optic commanded just about every control game. At least that should be good news, right? The fact of the matter was there were too many tight hard points in S&D games, where the theme for OG was if a couple things go their way, maybe it's a totally different story. You know, things like not sliding off of maps. We could have seen them start their bracket run potentially in the winner's bracket, but regardless, seeing Optic play up against these top teams, you can tell that there's a lot of work that needs to be done still to make sure that they can come out on top of close games like they faced throughout the pools. And to be honest, you cannot be going down as early as they were against teams like Evil Geniuses. So again, I have them sitting a little bit lower below, but I think it'd be hard to argue for them to be any higher based on their results, not only at Fort Worth, but generally speaking. I know you're gonna make the argument, well, Zuma played for them in the divisional, but that's just the way it is. Let's take a look at what our top 6 looks like. Starting things off with Red Reserve. And I would say very quietly, Red Reserve had a great tournament, nearly going 3-0 in pools after they lost a very big nail-biter versus Enigma 6 in their first game. And my biggest thing with this team is that they seem to be kind of a one-trick pony in control, and no one seems to care about it because they play Gridlock every single time, but 2 times they've played Gridlock, and no one seems to be wanting to ban it away from them. Interesting. The biggest thing in this team is that it's relatively balanced, though, as they do hold a positive win rate across every game type, as well as holding a positive average score across all of those different game modes. So this team is in the positive. Yes, they've been pretty inconsistent in the past, but they had a very good tournament, even though they weren't really being talked about much. So I have them sliding into my 6th spot because of it. In 5th, Gen G, and it might feel a little bit low for some of you guys out there, but here's the thing about it. Yes, Gen G got immensely better at Hardpoint. They went 9-2 with Envoy in the mix, but they suffered exponentially in the Search and Destroy, only going 4-6. This was a team that before that was flawless in the Search and Destroy. And some of those Search and Destroy losses were actually pretty ugly before they started to clean it up on day 2. But like I said, when the roster change happened, I didn't think this team would be immediately better, but the change will merit huge outputs in the future, especially when you try to consider making a team that could make a championship run. And I think that we saw that with their immediate respawn improvements, but their slight improvements over time in the Search and Destroy. It kind of was 3 steps backwards, 2 steps forward for the Search and Destroy. I think that that's going to be a little bit more evident that it'll be better by the time that they come to their interdivisional play, and I think we have a major competitor on our hand for the potential championship in London when we get there. For Reciprocity, I have them in the 4th spot, and this was my dark horse pick, and yeah, it paid off for sure here, as Reciprocity stayed consistent in the Search and Destroy from what they were able to find during the divisional play, but also at the tournament. But beyond that, they also saw improvements in the hardpoint with the addition of Dylan in the mix. Again, if you remember back, they were just 3-10 before Fort Worth, and they ended up going 8-9 at the event. However, the only downside to this team is they still need to clean things up in control, as they went 3-6 at the event and are still only a 4-12 overall in the mode. But as long as they put in that proper work, you see improvements in the team coordination, I think that we're going to see more great things from not only Dylan, but also the entirety of this roster. This was a great change for them, and I think they're absolutely deserving of a top 5 spot in the rankings. In the number 3 spot, I have 100 Thieves here, and my biggest thing is, when are we going to finally get a tournament or a divisional series where we get a full-on look where everybody's healthy so we can get a real honest adjustment of what the strengths of these teams are. The untimely exit of Priesta really put a hindrance on 100 Thieves. I think all of us are understanding of that, as they weren't able to quite match up versus Reciprocity with Pharaoh in the lineup. And trust me, I would have killed to see those two play at full force. And I honestly believe that 100 Thieves probably would have taken this set. Hell, they played them close on the respawns with Pharaoh as it was, and you can't really expect the Search and Destroy to be nearly as good as it is when you add in a last-minute sub. I really think that this team could have been a finalist, at least if they were at full force. And what a change that would mean since the beginning of the CWL regular season, when we all had a lot of doubts about this 100 Thieves roster with how staggering they were playing. But regardless, I think that this very well could have been a finalist team with Priesta being healthy, but we're not going to be able to see that here in this iteration of the CWL Fort Worth. My number 2 spot. Got Splice here, as the only team that they lost to throughout Fort Worth was Luminosity Gaming, and that was after they had already beaten them once in pools to the tune of a 3-1 win. Here's the other thing, though, about this team. Like Luminosity, they were also incredible at control this event, only losing 2 controls. They were 6-2 overall, but they were falling victim in the Search and Destroy and Hardpoint just a touch more than Luminosity. They still hold a positive average across all the modes, and the fact of the matter is, you saw a couple of moments where just the nuts and bolts needed to be tightened up just slightly if they want to be able to take down a team that's functioning as a full 5-man roster at the high level that Luminosity, for instance, was at Fort Worth. Regardless, I think that we're seeing that this team very well could be the real deal. It just comes down to, can they clean up a little bit of the scrap. Number 1, of course, Luminosity, and again, after the early scare versus Accelerate and the 1-3 loss to Splice, LG went on an absolute tear in the winner's bracket, escaping Gen G in a 5-game set, and then smoking everyone else from there on out. I would have loved to have seen them play against 100 Thieves, or Reciprocity at some point for that matter, during this tournament, but we're not going to be able to fully get the judgment on this team because they were only given the opportunity to play Splice 3 times and Gen G. Thing about it was, I think that those 4 games in specific did show us a lot about LG. Simple truth of it is that this team's improvement is eye-peeling from the divisional play. Slacked went from being a meme to a monster. Gunless again showed why he's one of the best to ever touch a Call of Duty. And then Classic John and Formal all came through with huge plays at different moments throughout the entirety of this tournament. The biggest thing for me is that now that everyone has a target on the back of LG, and we've seen some shaky moments from the divisional play from this team before, can we see consistency kind of show through when the interdivisional play comes in just a week? The good news is that they are hands down the best control team in the game, and if you can keep winning controls, the chances of you winning full sets goes astronomically higher. So that's the power rankings for you guys. Again, I hope you enjoyed these. I will be doing throughout the rest of the week a couple different videos. I'll be doing a lot of recasts of casts that were on the Charlie and Delta streams. So if you have any interest in seeing those, you'll find those popping up on my channel here pretty shortly. I'm also going to be doing kind of an insider look as far as what potential buyers might come to the market when CWL franchises in 2020. That should be a very interesting one. I've got about 32 different investors and potential options as far as who might buy into what we will likely see to be a 16-team CWL in 2020. That'll be a fun one. So if you like that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. We're getting very close to 10,000 subs. So if you really do come back here or find yourself here more than once, I would really appreciate it if you do think about subscribing to the channel. Until next time, though, hope you guys keep holding it down. Later. Bye-bye.